Beneath the bustling highways of San Diego lies one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. A mastodon's bones tell a story that science isn't ready to accept. Stones scattered around those bones suggest human hands touched them 130,000 years ago. But if that's true, who were these people? Where did they come from? And why does almost every expert in the world refuse to believe it? This is the Cerutti Mastodon story, a discovery that has divided the scientific community, challenged everything we thought we knew about human migration to the Americas, and raised questions that remain unanswered to this day. The story begins in 1992, on an ordinary afternoon during a routine highway construction project. Workers were excavating near San Diego County, California, preparing the ground for Route 54 expansion. None of them anticipated that beneath the dirt and dust, they were about to unearth one of the most controversial archaeological discoveries in modern history. One discovery that would spark heated debates, generate countless academic papers, and divide experts into opposing camps. During their excavation, these construction workers spotted something unusual emerging from the earth. Large bone fragments began surfacing from the ground. They were massive, prehistoric-looking, clearly important. They had the weight and presence of something ancient, something that belonged in a museum rather than a construction site. Following standard protocol, the California Department of Transportation immediately called in expert paleontologists to investigate. They needed professionals who understood extinct megafauna and could properly excavate and preserve these important remains. Enter Richard Cerutti and Thomas Desmarais, accomplished paleontologists from the San Diego Natural History Museum. Both men were experienced researchers with decades of fossil excavation experience. When they arrived at the site, what they discovered would fundamentally consume their professional lives for the next 25 years. What began as a routine salvage operation would transform into a quarter-century obsession with understanding the true nature of what lay buried in that construction site. The bones belonged to a mastodon, an extinct relative of the elephant that roamed the Americas during the Pleistocene epoch. Mastodons were massive creatures, standing 10 feet tall and weighing up to 6 tons. They possessed long tusks and a distinctive appearance different from mammoths. But this wasn't just any mastodon discovery. Mixed among the fossil bones were 5 large stones. These rocks appeared unusually positioned, almost intentionally arranged in a pattern that seemed too organized to be random. Some showed distinct signs of wear patterns. Some bore markings and striations that suggested they had been deliberately used as tools, hammerstones and anvils perhaps, stones that could be gripped by powerful hands and used to strike other objects with precision and force. Desmarais examined the mastodon's skeletal remains with meticulous scrutiny and scientific precision. He studied every fragment, photographed every angle, and documented every detail. He noticed something peculiar and compelling about the bones themselves. They weren't randomly shattered across the site. The fracture patterns showed a distinctive characteristic that Desmarais recognized immediately. Long bones like femurs displayed spiral fractures, the kind of breaks you see when fresh bone is struck with concentrated force and clear intent. These spiraling breaks are diagnostic of fresh bone fracturing. They don't occur when bone has already fossilized and become brittle. They require the elasticity and moisture content of relatively fresh bone. But here was the truly strange part that made Desmarais' heart race. The more fragile bones, the ribs and vertebrae, remained largely intact and unbroken. The selective pattern of breakage became absolutely crucial because it ruled out several natural explanations in one decisive observation. If heavy construction equipment had crushed the skeleton during the 1992 excavation, it would have broken everything indiscriminately, destroying both the strong bones and the fragile ones. If predators or scavengers had scattered and chewed the bones in ancient times, they would have caused different types of damage patterns, leaving teeth marks and gnaw marks. If natural decay processes and pressure had affected the remains over thousands of years, the fragile bones would have shown substantially more deterioration and fracturing. Yet here they were, virtually untouched, while the long bones showed systematic, purposeful breakage. The team collected numerous samples from the mastodon bones and surrounding material for careful analysis. Traditional carbon dating proved impossible because the collagen protein in the bones had eroded away over the vast millennia that had passed since the mastodon's death. Carbon-14 dating requires organic material and collagen to still be present in sufficient quantity, but recent revolutionary advances in radiometric dating offered new possibilities for scientists working with ancient material. Scientists turned to uranium-thorium dating, an advanced technique that had dramatically improved in accuracy over the previous decades. This sophisticated method measures the precise ratio of uranium isotopes and their decay products in fossil bone. It exploits the fact that living organisms don't incorporate thorium, but do incorporate uranium. After death, the uranium begins to decay predictably into thorium at a constant rate. By measuring these ratios, scientists can calculate how long ago the organism died. This technique can provide reliable dates for materials up to 500,000 years old, making it ideal for dating very ancient fossils. The results shocked everyone involved in the research. When Dr. James Paces from the United States Geological Survey conducted the uranium-thorium analysis, the numbers emerged unambiguous and clear. The mastodon bones dated to approximately 130,000 years old. 130,000 years. That incomprehensible number hung in the air like an impossible dream, a figure that seemed to belong to science fiction rather than legitimate paleontology. The researchers stared at their data again and again, checking for analytical errors, recalibrating instruments meticulously, running additional independent tests from different laboratories. The results remained consistent and reliable across all testing. The bones were definitely, conclusively, 130,000 years old. This wasn't a mistake or measurement error. This was the real age of the specimens. For context, it is absolutely essential to understand what this discovery meant for the entire archaeological and anthropological world. The prevailing consensus at that time, and even continuing to this day in 2026, held that humans arrived in North America no earlier than approximately 15,000 years ago. Most mainstream experts pointed to the Clovis culture as the earliest definitively established evidence of human presence in the Americas, dating back to approximately 13,000 years ago. Clovis spearheads and distinctive tools had been found across North America, providing what seemed like solid evidence of human settlement. Some progressive researchers had begun arguing for pre-Clovis settlements, carefully pushing the timeline back to perhaps 20,000 or 25,000 years ago at the absolute oldest. These early claims were controversial, but received growing consideration as evidence accumulated. But 130,000 years? That was not just a simple revision to the timeline. That was not an incremental adjustment to existing models. That was a complete and total inversion of everything archaeologists believed they definitively knew about human settlement of the Americas. It would rewrite the history of human civilization itself. The researchers continued their meticulous work, documenting every detail of the site. They created detailed maps showing the precise position of each bone fragment and stone. They photographed the artifacts from multiple angles. They recorded the geological context, the soil layers, the surrounding environment. They were preparing their evidence for the inevitable storm of skepticism that would come. Thomas Desmarais understood the magnitude of what they were claiming. In his public statements, he acknowledged the burden of proof before them. He said their claim of 130,000-year-old human activity required extraordinary evidence. They believed they had it. The team decided to test their hypothesis through carefully controlled experimental archaeology. If the spiral fractures were indeed caused by human stone tool usage in ancient times, then modern experimenters should be able to replicate the damage using similar techniques and materials. They obtained fresh elephant bones from research institutions and zoological facilities, material that was structurally very similar to mastodons given their evolutionary relationship. They selected stones similar in size and composition to those found at the Cerutti site. Using these materials, they began striking the fresh elephant bones with the stones, attempting to systematically break them to expose the nutritious marrow inside. The process required technique and understanding of bone mechanics. Strike too lightly, and the bone would only crack. Strike in the wrong place, and the fracture pattern would be entirely different. But when executed correctly, using the right technique and force, the experiment produced remarkable results. They created the identical spiral fracture patterns seen on the ancient mastodon bones. The fractures matched precisely in shape, angle, and distribution. They documented in meticulous detail exactly how humans break long bones to access the highly nutritious marrow inside. They showed photographic evidence that the fractures from their experiment matched the ancient mastodon bones with striking accuracy. This experimental replication became one of their strongest and most defensible supporting arguments. It demonstrated that humans could and did create these exact fracture patterns through deliberate and skilled action. Co-author Steve Holin from the Center for American Paleolithic Research located in Hot Springs, South Dakota, described their research with genuine enthusiasm and scientific confidence. He emphasized a fundamental principle of archaeological investigation and interpretation. He noted that when you systematically eliminate all other plausible natural processes and then successfully reproduce the observed phenomena through human activity, you have very strong evidence for genuine human involvement. It's a logical argument based on deductive reasoning. He pointed out that this particular bone-breaking technique for accessing marrow has been used by humans in Africa for at least 1.5 million years. Paleoanthropologists had documented evidence of this practice going back millennia. The method is distinctive and recognizable to anyone trained in bone fracture patterns. It is extraordinarily difficult to replicate through natural processes alone, through animal activity, or through random geological events. Holin also addressed the stone tools themselves with careful analysis. One of the rocks at the site weighed nearly 30 pounds, a substantial and heavy stone. This was far heavier than the stone tools used by non-human animals. Researchers had documented tool use among animals before, in great detail. Chimpanzees in Ivory Coast have been cracking open nuts with stone hammers for thousands of years, a practice passed through generations. Brazilian capuchin monkeys have smashed cashews open with rocks for generations. Yet the difference becomes crucial when you examine these animal tools closely. None of those animals use stones as large as 30 pounds. None of them demonstrate the sophisticated fracture patterns evident at the Cerutti site. The scale and precision suggested something beyond animal capability. The team spent years carefully preparing their manuscript for publication. An enormous amount of effort went into this work. 24 years of meticulous research, rigorous testing, independent verification, and extensive documentation had gone into their comprehensive work. They knew the claims would face intense scrutiny. In February 2017, after an exhaustive peer review process, they received word that a prestigious journal had accepted their paper for publication. Nature magazine, one of the most respected and influential scientific publications in the world, officially agreed to publish their extraordinary findings. The journal's editors recognized the importance of the work despite its controversial nature. The formal announcement was scheduled for April 26, 2017. The researchers carefully planned a press conference to present their evidence directly to the media and to the broader scientific community. They understood the magnitude of what they were claiming and prepared accordingly. Thomas Desmarais stood before the gathered journalists, reporters, and scientists and carefully explained their findings in detail. He openly acknowledged that 130,000 years seemed impossibly old when first considered. He understood completely that their site would become the oldest archaeological site in the Americas by a factor of 10 if accepted. He recognized with clarity that this discovery would challenge the fundamental understanding of human migration and settlement patterns throughout scholarly discussion. Yet the evidence, he insisted, with conviction, was genuine and real. The uranium-thorium dating was reliable and repeatedly verified. The fracture patterns were distinctive and consistent. The experimental replication confirmed their interpretation conclusively. Richard Fullagar, a respected co-author from the University of Wollongong in Australia, addressed skepticism with direct engagement. He acknowledged that extraordinary claims do indeed require extraordinary evidence to be credible. He argued persuasively, however, that the evidence they presented was clear, compelling, and difficult to dismiss through alternative explanations. The scientific community's response was immediate, intense, and deeply divided. Some researchers found the evidence compelling and genuinely worthy of serious consideration. Other experts dismissed it outright as impossible, regardless of the physical evidence presented to them. The controversy that erupted was unprecedented in scale and vehemence. Academic journals filled with critiques and counterarguments from skeptical researchers. Experts published papers challenging various aspects of the research methodology and interpretation. The debate became fierce and technical, involving complex discussions of bone fracture mechanics and radiometric dating protocols. The debate also became deeply personal as scientists on opposite sides questioned each other's competence and judgment. Some archaeologists fundamentally questioned whether the stones were truly intentional. Geological processes might create similar-looking formations through random weathering and erosion. Others pointed out that the site lacked many artifacts you would typically expect to find at any human occupation site. Where were the signs of constructed shelter? Where were the food waste materials and bones from consumed animals? Where were the numerous other stone tools? Where was the cultural context and material culture that always accompanies every documented human habitation? A crucial criticism emerged regarding modern disturbance. Critics argued that construction equipment might have damaged the bones decades earlier. The researchers countered this objection with careful observation. They noted that many of the bone fragments were coated in thick crusts of pedogenic carbonate, a mineral deposit that forms slowly over thousands of years. This coating clearly demonstrated that the fracturing happened in ancient times, not during modern construction. The carbonate crust could not form overnight or over weeks. It required millennia to develop. Other scientists questioned whether non-human predators or natural processes could explain the evidence. Could large carnivores have created these fracture patterns? The researchers addressed this argument directly. Carnivores chew and break bones differently than humans do. The distinctive patterns found at the Cerutti site matched human tool use, not predator-feeding behavior. The bone damage patterns were too uniform, too organized, too purposeful to be explained by animal activity. The team had considered every natural explanation and found them all inadequate. Despite the criticism, the original research team remained confident in their interpretation. They invited skeptics to examine the evidence directly. Some of the bones and stones were put on display at the San Diego Natural History Museum, where scientists could conduct their own analyses. The researchers published additional papers responding to critiques point by point. In scientific journals like Paleoamerica, they addressed each objection with detailed counter-arguments. The debate continued year after year, with neither side convincing the other. The historical context for this controversy runs deep in archaeological tradition. The field had been burned before by premature claims of early human settlement. The famous Pedra Furada site in Brazil claimed evidence of human occupation dating back 48,000 years. That discovery sparked similar controversy and remains disputed today. Scientists had learned to be extremely skeptical of extraordinary claims about early human presence in the Americas. The Clovis first model had dominated thinking for decades. Challenging it risked professional reputation and credibility. Yet evidence did accumulate suggesting pre-Clovis occupation. Monteverde in Chile appeared to show human settlement around 14 to 500 years ago. It took nearly 20 years of persistent advocacy by researcher Tom Dillahay to convince the archaeological community. Even now, some Clovis first believers reject Monteverde's authenticity. Against this historical background, the Cerutti Mastodon claim seemed almost impossible to accept. Yet the evidence was physical, tangible, and repeatedly confirmed by multiple dating methods. The experimental replication was successful and reproducible. The site's geology was well documented and studied by qualified experts. The bone fracture patterns were distinctive and consistent with human tool use. The positioning of artifacts seemed too organized to be random. Yet skepticism persisted stubbornly within the archaeological community. Part of the resistance stemmed from fundamental questions about human migration to the Americas. How could humans have reached North America 130,000 years ago? Current genetic evidence suggested migration occurred much later. Sea level was different back then, potentially blocking. Migration routes. The climate was harsher, more unforgiving. How would prehistoric humans have survived the journey across the Bering Strait or along Pacific coastlines? Were there boats? Were there sufficient populations to establish breeding communities in the New World? Did any genetic or archaeological evidence support such an early presence? These questions revealed deeper issues within the scientific community. The Cerutti Mastodon discovery didn't exist in isolation. It challenged the entire theoretical framework archaeologists had constructed about human migration and settlement patterns in the Americas. Accepting the Cerutti evidence would require rethinking continental settlement processes, revising models of human expansion, and reconsidering vast amounts of existing research. That's a significant burden to place on any discovery, no matter how compelling the physical evidence appears. Yet proponents of early human presence in the Americas pointed to other evidence. Archaeological sites in South America suggested human occupation earlier than the Clovis dates. White Sands National Park in New Mexico presented another controversial case, with researchers claiming human footprints dated to around 23,000 years ago. The archaeological community debated this evidence as fiercely as it debated Cerutti. Some researchers began to suggest that pre-Clovis settlement might be more common than previously believed. Perhaps humans did arrive earlier. Perhaps multiple waves of migration occurred. Perhaps our understanding of these ancient peoples remained incomplete and oversimplified. The Cerutti Mastodon site became a focal point for this broader debate about early human presence in the Americas. It represented both the promise and the problem of archaeological evidence from extreme antiquity. The bones were real, the stones were real, the fracture patterns were real, but the interpretation required accepting a radical revision of human prehistory. The dating was solid, using modern methods, yet the context seemed impossible given current migration theories. The evidence was compelling, yet incomplete. No humans. Artifacts definitively showed human occupation of the site. No skeletal remains of the actual people who broke these bones had been found. No cultural materials demonstrated what these people ate, how they lived, or where they came from. Scientists who examined the site directly often came away impressed by the evidence, but uncertain about its interpretation. Some remained open to the possibility of 130,000-year-old human activity, but wanted additional corroborating evidence. Others found the evidence suggestive, but not conclusive. Few completely rejected the evidence based on theoretical considerations alone, without thoroughly examining the physical materials. This range of responses characterized the scientific response to Cerutti throughout the 2017 to 2026 period. The San Diego Natural History Museum stood firmly behind their paleontologists and the research they had conducted. The museum's staff pointed out that critics had failed to provide satisfactory alternative explanations for the evidence presented. If the bones weren't fractured by humans, then what? If the stones weren't tools, then what purpose did their positioning serve? Why were long bones systematically broken while fragile bones remained intact? How did the distinctive spiral fractures form through natural processes? Museum representatives challenged skeptics to provide testable alternatives and credible explanations. Few did so effectively. Thomas Demiray continued his career at the museum, maintaining his position on the Cerutti evidence. He published additional research, participated in debates with critics, and welcomed examination of the materials by other experts. He understood that science progresses through challenge and discussion, not through consensus achieved by authority. He also understood that accepting the Cerutti evidence would be a significant step for archaeology. It would require the field to reconsider fundamental assumptions about human settlement in the Americas. It would open the door to accepting other controversial early sites. It would necessitate revising textbooks and retraining a generation of archaeologists in new theories and models. The broader implications of the Cerutti discovery extended beyond archaeology into other fields. Geneticists studied ancient DNA from skeletons and artifacts. Did genetic evidence support the possibility of a human presence 130,000 years ago? Paleontologists examined the extinction of megafauna like mastodons. If humans were present in North America for over 100,000 years before the megafauna extinctions, did they play a role in those extinctions? Geologists and paleoclimatologists studied Ice Age climate patterns. Could humans have survived in the harsh climate of 130,000 years ago? Anthropologists considered what such early peoples might have been like, how they lived, what they ate, how they organized themselves socially. These deeply interconnected questions made the Cerutti Mastodon site profoundly important beyond its immediate archaeological significance and regional importance. It represented a fundamental philosophical challenge to how scientists understood human history and structured their interpretive frameworks. The discovery forced scientists to directly confront the limits of their current knowledge and the potentially misplaced certainty of their previous conclusions about human prehistory. Perhaps humans were present in the Americas earlier than anyone had previously seriously considered in academic literature. Perhaps the entire history of human civilization and development needed significant and substantial revision. Perhaps the story of human settlement and expansion across the entire globe was far more complex, far more extensive, and stretched much longer into time than current evolutionary models suggested. By the 2020s, the Cerutti Mastodon discovery had become a touchstone in discussions about paradigm shifts and scientific revolutions. Scientists often compared it to J. Harlan Bretz's revolutionary flood geology work, which boldly challenged established geological principles with evidence that seemed impossible to conventional thinkers of his era. Bretz claimed with conviction that catastrophic megafloods had shaped the dramatic landscape of the Pacific Northwest. Geologists of that time initially rejected his ideas as absolutely absurd and scientifically unjustified. Yet as time passed, evidence gradually accumulated from multiple independent sources. By the end of Bretz's own life, the scientific community had accepted his revolutionary theories as correct. Perhaps, some optimistic advocates argued, the Cerutti Mastodon would follow a similar trajectory of eventual vindication. Perhaps future discoveries and evidence would ultimately vindicate the researchers at San Diego Natural History Museum and demonstrate conclusively that 130,000-year-old human presence in the Americas was genuine and real. Others argued the opposite. Perhaps future research would definitively disprove the Cerutti claims, demonstrating that natural processes could explain all the observed phenomena. Perhaps more careful examination would reveal flaws in the methodology or interpretation. Perhaps the truth would lie somewhere between complete acceptance and complete rejection, acknowledging that the site shows evidence of something unusual but not definitively human activity. The archaeological and paleontological communities remain deeply divided on this fundamental question. The mystery of Cerutti remains unsolved as of 2026. The bones are still 130,000 years old according to the dating methods employed. The fracture patterns are still distinctive and match human tool use patterns. The stones are still positioned in ways that seem intentional rather than random. The experimental replication remains successful, yet the broader scientific community remains unconvinced. The discovery has not fundamentally changed how archaeologists think about early human settlement in the Americas. It remains controversial, debated, questioned, and discussed. What makes this discovery so captivating is precisely this uncertainty. We have physical evidence that seems to tell one story. We have scientific skepticism suggesting alternative interpretations. We have a deep historical precedent for false claims about early human settlement. We have theoretical frameworks that seem incompatible with the claimed dates. Yet we also have the nagging possibility that science simply hasn't yet accepted what the Cerutti evidence demonstrates. Perhaps future discoveries will vindicate this site. Perhaps other locations will reveal 130,000-year-old evidence of human settlement, providing corroboration and context. The people who broke those mastodon bones, if indeed people broke them, remain mysterious. We don't know who they were. We don't know where they came from. We don't know how long they stayed in San Diego. We don't know what became of them. We don't know if they were ancestors of later Native Americans or a separate population that eventually disappeared. The complete absence of these people from the archaeological record, despite 130,000 years of potential presence, seems suspicious to skeptics. Where are their tools, their settlements, their burial grounds, their genetic descendants? Why would they leave virtually no trace except for this one site with a broken mastodon? Yet proponents might argue that 130,000 years is an incredibly long time. Populations could have risen and fallen, migrated, mixed, and disappeared, leaving minimal physical evidence. Sites from that period would be incredibly rare, deeply buried, or completely destroyed by geological processes. Finding one site with evidence of human activity would be remarkable precisely because finding many would be nearly impossible. The absence of evidence from that period might reflect the difficulty of detecting such ancient remains rather than the absence of human activity. This fundamental uncertainty is what makes the Cerutti Mastodon discovery so compelling to explore and discuss. It sits at the boundary between what science knows and what science suspects. It challenges established narratives while remaining unproven by strict scientific standards. It offers glimpses of a potentially vast human history in the Americas that existing models have entirely overlooked. Or it represents a misinterpretation of natural phenomena that merely resembles evidence of human activity. The truth remains buried in those San Diego bones, waiting for some future insight or discovery to finally reveal what actually happened 130,000 years ago beneath what is now Route 54. The Cerutti Mastodon site continues to fascinate and frustrate the scientific community. Researchers return to examine the evidence. New analytical techniques are developed and applied to the materials. Papers continue to be published and debated. The mystery deepens with each passing year. The bones remain still 130,000 years old, still bearing their distinctive fractures, still surrounded by those intriguing stones. They tell a story that science isn't quite ready to accept, but cannot entirely dismiss. Beneath the highways of San Diego lies this puzzle, this challenge, this potential revelation about the distant human past. The question remains unanswered, the mystery unsolved, the truth undetermined. And perhaps that is exactly how it should be, reminding us that science is not about finding all the answers, but about asking better questions and following the evidence wherever it leads, even to places that seem impossible.